The smell of motor oil and heated metal filled the air as Robert Blackstone walked through his car factory. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the concrete floor with each frustrated step. As the owner and CEO of Premier Motors, he had built this company from nothing into one of the most respected car manufacturers in the country, but right now he felt like everything was falling apart. 3 months. That's how long his best engineers had been working on the same problem, and they were no closer to solving it than when they started. The new luxury car they were building kept breaking down at exactly the same point every single time. The engine would run perfectly smooth for exactly 847 miles, then suddenly die completely. Not just stop working, but actually destroy itself from the inside. Robert stopped in front of the problem car and stared at it like it had personally insulted his mother. This wasn't just any car. This was supposed to be their masterpiece, the vehicle that would put Premier Motors on the same level as the big European luxury brands. They had already spent $15 million developing it, and now they had a $200 million contract waiting. The only problem was, they couldn't deliver a car that would explode after less than 1,000 miles. He looked around, at his team of engineers. These weren't just any mechanics from down the street. These were the smartest people money could buy. Graduates from the best universities, people who could solve problems that would make most folks' heads spin. They had computers that could run 1 million calculations in seconds, tools that could measure things smaller than human hair, and equipment that cost more than most people's houses. Yet here they were, completely stumped by an engine that seemed determined to destroy itself. Still nothing? Robert asked Dr. Chen, his head engineer. The man looked exhausted. His usually perfect hair was messy, and his shirt was wrinkled from spending another night at the factory. "We've tested everything, sir," Dr. Chen said, rubbing his tired eyes. "We've replaced every major component, upgraded the computer systems, changed the oil type, modified the cooling system. We even brought in specialists from Germany who worked on similar engines. Nothing works." Robert felt his blood pressure rising. This is impossible. Cars don't just decide to break themselves, for no reason. There has to be something you're missing. "I know how it sounds," Dr. Chen replied. "But we've run every test we can think of. The engine performs perfectly in all our lab tests. It passes every inspection. But put it in a real car and drive it for 847 miles, and boom, same result every time." As they talked, Robert noticed someone moving slowly around the edge of their conversation. It was the night cleaning lady, the quiet woman who had been working at the factory for about 2 years. She was pushing her cart full of supplies, but she kept glancing over at the broken car with an expression he couldn't quite read. What was her name again? Robert tried to remember but realized with some embarrassment that he had never actually learned it. She was just always there, quietly doing her job, emptying trash cans and mopping floors. The kind of person who became invisible after a while, part of the background of daily business. But today, something about the way she was looking at the car caught his attention. It wasn't the casual curiosity of someone passing by. She was studying it, her dark eyes moving over the engine with the kind of focus he usually only saw from his engineers. "Excuse me," Robert called out, walking toward her. The woman looked up, startled like a deer caught in headlights. "You seem very interested in our little problem here." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Blackstone," she said quickly, her voice soft but clear. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just finishing up the cleaning in this section." Robert looked at her more carefully. She was probably in her 40s, with graying, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her uniform was clean and neat, and her hands showed the kind of calluses that came from years of hard work. There was something about her eyes, though. They were sharp, intelligent, the kind of eyes that noticed things. No, don't apologize," Robert said, an idea starting to form in his mind. "You've been working here for what, 2 years now? You must have seen us struggling with this engine problem." "Yes, sir," she nodded. "I work the night shift, so I see the engineers working late sometimes. They seem very frustrated." Robert glanced back at his team of expensive experts, then looked at the cleaning lady again. A crazy thought was building in his head. Maybe it was the stress talking, or maybe it was just his frustration with the whole situation, but he found himself saying something he never thought he would say. You know what? Robert said, his voice getting louder so the engineers could hear. I'm feeling generous today. My team of brilliant engineers, with all their fancy degrees and expensive equipment, can't figure out what's wrong with this engine. So here's what I'm going to do. Dr. Chen and the other engineers stopped their work and turned to listen. Some of them had confused looks on their faces, wondering why their boss was talking to the cleaning lady about their technical problems. If you think you can solve what these highly educated people can't figure out, Robert continued, gesturing toward his engineering team, then be my guest. Take a look at this engine. If you can fix it, I'll give you a $50,000 bonus. The cleaning lady's eyes went wide. $50,000. That's right, Robert said, knowing he was probably being ridiculous but somehow unable to stop himself. $50,000 if you can solve our unfixable engine problem. Some of the engineers started laughing quietly. Robert could hear whispered comments about the cleaning lady trying to fix what they couldn't. But the woman herself didn't seem to notice the laughter. She was looking at the engine again, and that same focused expression was back on her face. And if I can't fix it? She asked. Robert shrugged. Then you go back to cleaning, and we all pretend this conversation never happened. No harm done. The woman was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking hard about something. Finally, she nodded. Okay, Mr. Blackstone. I'll try. Excellent, Robert said, already starting to feel a little foolish about the whole thing. Dr. Chen, give her whatever access she needs, and everyone else back to work. We still have a deadline to meet. As Robert walked away, he could hear more quiet laughter from his engineering team. He supposed he couldn't blame them. It probably did seem pretty ridiculous asking a cleaning lady to solve a problem that had stumped some of the smartest automotive engineers in the country. But something about the way she had looked at that engine made him curious. Maybe it was just desperation talking, but Robert had a feeling this story wasn't over yet. Sometimes the most unexpected people had the most surprising answers. And $50,000? Well, compared to the $15 million they had already spent, that was practically pocket change. If nothing else, it might be the most entertaining mistake he had ever made. Diana Washington stood alone next to the car that had been causing so much trouble. Her heart was beating fast and her hands felt a little shaky. $50,000. That was more money than she made in 2 years of cleaning this factory. It was enough to finally fix the roof on her house, maybe even help her daughter with college expenses. But first, she had to figure out what was wrong with this engine. And she had to do it while everyone thought she was crazy for even trying. Diana pushed her cleaning cart to the side and walked slowly around the car. She had been watching this particular vehicle for months, ever since the engineers started working on it. During her night shifts, when the factory was quiet and empty, she would sometimes hear them running tests. The sound of the engine had become familiar to her, like a song she knew by heart. That was the thing about working nights that the day shift people didn't understand. In the quiet hours, you could hear things differently. Every little sound stood out. Every vibration traveled. Further, Diana had learned to listen to machines the way some people listen to music, picking out individual notes in a complex symphony. She opened the hood and looked down at the engine. It was beautiful, really. All shiny metal and carefully arranged. Parts, everything designed to work together perfectly. The engineers had spent millions of dollars making sure every component was exactly right, but something was still wrong and they couldn't figure out what. Diana reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook. It was old and worn, held together with rubber bands, but it contained 20 years of notes about engines and how they worked. She had started keeping it when she was young, back when she thought she was going to be an engineer herself. That felt like a lifetime ago now. Diana had been the smartest kid in her high school, especially when it came to math and science. Her teachers said she could do anything she wanted, go to any college, have any career. She had even gotten a scholarship to study engineering. But life had other plans. Her mother got sick right after graduation, and Diana had to choose between college and taking care of her family. The scholarship money wasn't enough to cover everything, and there was no one else to help. So she put her dreams on hold and went to work instead. Over the years, she had done all kinds of jobs. She worked at a gas station where she learned to diagnose car problems just by listening to how engines sounded when people drove up. She spent 5 years at an auto repair shop, where the owner taught her everything he knew about fixing cars. She even ran her own small business for a while, specializing in European cars that other mechanics couldn't figure out. But when her husband died unexpectedly 3 years ago, everything fell apart. The business couldn't survive without his help, and Diana found herself needing steady work with good benefits. That's how she ended up at Premier Motors, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, using her hands to clean instead of to build and repair. Most people at the factory had no idea about her background. They saw a middle-aged black woman in a cleaning uniform and made assumptions about what she could and couldn't do. Diana had learned not to correct those assumptions. It was easier to be invisible, to do her job quietly and go home to her small house where she could work on her own projects. But this engine was different. She had been listening to it for months, and she was starting to hear patterns that the engineers were missing. Diana put on the safety glasses that hung from her uniform pocket and leaned in closer to examine the engine. She didn't have fancy diagnostic equipment, but she had something that computers couldn't replicate: experience. She knew how engines were supposed to sound, how they were supposed to feel, how they were supposed to vibrate. She started the engine and listened carefully. To most people, it sounded perfect, smooth, quiet, powerful. But Diana could hear something else underneath the surface, a tiny irregularity in the rhythm, so small that it would be easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. She walked around to different sides of the car, listening from various angles. The sound was slightly different depending on where she stood. That told her something about where the problem might be located. Next, she put her hand on different parts of the engine while it was running. This was something she had learned from her old boss at the repair shop. Vibrations could tell you things that your ears might miss. The engine felt mostly normal, but there was one spot near the back where the vibration pattern seemed off. Diana pulled out her notebook and started making sketches. She drew the engine layout from memory, marking the spots where she heard or felt irregularities. Then she started writing down numbers, calculating things in her head the way she had learned to do 20 years ago. While she worked, some of the day shift engineers started showing up for work. They saw her bent over the engine with her notebook and began whispering to each other. Diana could hear pieces of their conversations. "What's she doing?" Blackstone said she could try to fix it. "This should be entertaining. Poor woman has no idea what she's getting into." Diana ignored them and kept working. She had dealt with people underestimating her before. In fact, she was used to being the only woman in rooms full of men who thought they knew better than she did. The difference was that this time she had something to prove, not just to them but to herself. She turned off the engine and started examining individual components more closely. The cooling system looked fine, but she noticed something interesting about the way certain parts were connected. There were 2 different types of metal being used in one section, and they were joined together in a way that looked perfect, but might cause problems over time. Diana had seen this kind of issue before, back when she was working on luxury European cars. The problem was subtle, something that would only show up after a specific amount of use. It had to do with how different metals expanded and contracted when they heated up and cooled down. She made more notes in her notebook, drawing detailed diagrams of the connection points. Then she started thinking about the computer systems that controlled the engine. Modern cars weren't just mechanical anymore. They had complex software that monitored everything and made constant adjustments to keep the engine running smoothly. What if the computer was actually making the problem worse? What if it was detecting the tiny irregularity she had noticed and trying to fix it, but doing it in a way that created bigger problems? Diana spent the next 2 hours examining every part of the engine she could reach. She took detailed notes about everything she found, no matter how small or seemingly unimportant. By the time she was finished, she had filled several pages in her notebook with observations, calculations, and theories. The engineers were watching her more openly now, some of them clearly amused by the sight of a cleaning lady taking apart their problem engine. But a few of them seemed genuinely curious about what she was doing. Dr. Chen walked over at one point and glanced at her notebook. "Those are some detailed drawings," he said, sounding surprised. "Thank you," Diana replied simply, not offering any explanation about where she had learned to make technical diagrams. As her shift ended and the day shift took over, Diana packed up her notebook and headed home. She had a lot of thinking to do, and she wanted to research some of her theories before she went any further. But she was starting to have an idea about what might be wrong with the engine. It was going to take more investigation to be sure, but for the first time in months, someone at Premier Motors might actually be close to solving the unfixable problem. The question was whether anyone would believe her when she explained what she had found. Diana arrived at work an hour early the next evening. She had spent most of the day at home, going through old technical manuals and looking up information on her computer. The more she researched, the more convinced she became that she was onto something important. Her small house was filled with automotive books and magazines that she had collected over the years. Most people would be surprised to see the collection, but Diana had never stopped learning about cars and engines, even when she wasn't working on them professionally. It was like a hobby that had turned into an obsession. Last night, she had found 3 different cases where luxury car manufacturers had dealt with similar problems. In each case, the solution had been simple once someone figured out what was really causing the issue. But finding that root cause had taken months or even years. Diana walked straight to the problem car and opened the hood. The factory was still busy with the day shift, so she had to work around the engineers who were running their own tests. They barely acknowledged her presence, which was fine with Diana. She preferred to work without people looking over her shoulder. She started by confirming her observations from the previous day. The tiny irregularity in the engine sound was still there, exactly as she remembered. The unusual vibration pattern was still present in the same location. Everything matched her notes. But today, Diana wanted to dig deeper. She had brought some of her own tools from home, small instruments that she had collected over the years. Nothing fancy or expensive, just reliable equipment that had served her well in the past. She started by checking the temperature at different points on the engine while it was running. This was something the computer diagnostic system should have caught, but Diana had learned not to trust computers completely. Sometimes old-fashioned methods worked better. Sure enough, she found what she was looking for. There was a slight temperature difference between 2 connected parts that should have been exactly the same temperature. The difference was tiny, less than 5 degrees, but it was consistent every time she measured it. Diana turned off the engine and examined the connection point more closely. This was where 2 different pieces of metal were joined together, and now she was certain this was the source of the problem. The metals were expanding at different rates when they heated up, creating a tiny gap that got bigger over time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the car's computer system was detecting this tiny gap and trying to compensate for it. Every time the engine ran, the computer made small adjustments to try to fix what it thought was a performance problem. But these adjustments were actually making the gap bigger, not smaller. It was like trying to fix a small crack in a wall by pushing on it harder and harder until the whole wall collapsed. Diana spent the next 3 hours documenting everything she found. She measured temperatures, calculated expansion rates, and traced the computer's adjustment patterns. She even found the exact point in the software code where the problem was happening. While she worked, word of her investigation started spreading through the factory. Engineers who had been ignoring her the day before were now stopping to watch what she was doing. Some of them asked questions about her methods, and Diana found herself explaining concepts she hadn't talked about in years. "You're checking thermal expansion coefficients by hand?" asked one of the younger engineers, a woman named Patricia who seemed genuinely interested. "The computer should catch that," said another engineer, looking skeptical. "Computers only catch what they're programmed to look for," Diana replied, not looking up from her work. "Sometimes you have to look at things differently." As the evening went on, more engineers gathered around the car. Diana could feel their attention, but she tried to focus on her work. She was close to proving her theory, but she needed to be absolutely certain before she presented her findings. The critical test came when she disconnected the computer's adaptive adjustment system and ran the engine manually. Without the computer, trying to fix the tiny gap, the engine ran more smoothly. Not perfectly, but noticeably better. "Did you hear that?" Diana asked the engineers who were watching. "The irregularity is still there, but it's not getting worse." Several of them nodded, looking surprised. Dr. Chen pushed through the crowd to get a closer look at what Diana was doing. "Show me exactly what you found," he said. His earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity, Diana walked him through her entire investigation, step by step. She showed him the temperature measurements, explained the expansion rate calculations, and demonstrated how the computer system was making the problem worse instead of better. "The solution isn't complicated," Diana explained, pointing to her notebook where she had sketched out the fix. "Replace this connecting piece with a single component made from one type of metal instead of two, and reprogram the computer to account for the different thermal properties of the new part." Dr. Chen studied her drawings carefully. "How much would this modification cost?" "About $300 per car," Diana said. "Maybe less if you're buying parts in large quantities." The crowd of engineers was completely quiet now. For 3 months, they had been looking for a complex solution to what they thought was a complex problem. Diana had found a simple solution that would cost less than most people spent on groceries in a month. "There's one more thing," Diana added, flipping to a new page in her notebook. "I think I know why the failure happens at exactly 847 miles every time." She had spent hours the night before working out the math on this part. It had to do with the rate at which the gap expanded, combined with the frequency of the computer's adjustment attempts, like a mathematical formula that always produced the same result. "The gap reaches critical size at that exact mileage point," Diana explained. "Every single time, because the variables are always the same. Temperature cycles, computer adjustment frequency, thermal expansion rates. It's actually very predictable once you understand what's happening." Dr. Chen was shaking his head in amazement. "We've been approaching this all wrong. We kept looking for a random failure, something unpredictable. We never considered that the failure might be happening for very specific, calculable reasons. Sometimes the obvious answer is the right answer," Diana said quietly. "You just have to be willing to look at things from a different angle." Robert Blackstone chose that moment to walk over and see what was causing all the excitement. When he saw the crowd of engineers surrounding Diana and the problem car, his eyebrows went up. "What's all this about?" he asked Dr. Chen. "Sir, I think you need to hear what she's found," Dr. Chen replied, gesturing toward Diana. "She may have solved our problem." Robert looked at Diana with new interest. Yesterday, offering her the chance to work on the engine had seemed like a crazy impulse, maybe even a little cruel. Today, standing in front of a crowd of impressed engineers, Diana looked like anything but a simple cleaning lady. "Is that true?" Robert asked her directly. "Have you figured out what's wrong with our engine?" Diana nodded, holding up her notebook. "I believe so, Mr. Blackstone. And I think I know how to fix it." As she began to explain her findings to the CEO, Diana felt something she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since she had put away her engineering dreams and picked up a mop, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Robert Blackstone stared at Diana in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. Around them, the factory floor had gone quiet as word spread that something important was happening. Engineers, technicians, and factory workers had gathered, in a loose circle, all waiting to hear what would happen next. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Robert said slowly, his voice carrying across the silent factory floor. "You're telling me that my team of highly educated engineers, with all their expensive equipment and computer programs, has been looking at this problem completely backwards for 3 months?" Diana nodded, clutching her worn notebook against her chest. The computer diagnostic systems were showing them what they expected to see, not what was actually happening. Sometimes you have to turn off the computers and use your hands and ears instead. "And you figured this out in 2 days?" "I've been observing this engine for months during my night shifts," Diana replied. "I just never had permission to actually examine it closely until yesterday." Robert looked around at his engineering team. Dr. Chen and the others were nodding, clearly convinced by Diana's explanation. Several of them looked embarrassed, like students who had just realized they had been studying for the wrong test. "Dr. Chen," Robert said, his voice sharp. "Is she right?" "From what she's shown us, yes, sir," Dr. Chen replied reluctantly. "Her analysis appears to be completely accurate. The solution she's proposing should work." "Should work?" Robert's voice was getting louder. "We've been paying you people millions of dollars to solve this problem, and the cleaning lady figures it out in her spare time?" "Sir, with respect," Diana interrupted quietly. "They're very good engineers. They just got focused on the wrong approach. It happens to everyone sometimes." Robert turned back to her, and his expression was a mixture of amazement and suspicion. "You seem to know quite a lot about engineering for someone who cleans floors for a living." Diana took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading and hoping for at the same time. For 2 years she had been invisible in this factory, just another worker in a uniform doing a job that most people didn't think required any special skills. But now, with everyone staring at her, there was no way to stay invisible anymore. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "there are some things about me that aren't on my employment record." "Such as?" Diana opened her notebook and pulled out a folded piece of paper that she kept tucked inside the back cover. It was old and yellowed, but the text was still clear. She handed it to Robert. "That's my college transcript," she said. "Bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from State University. Graduated with honors." Robert unfolded the paper and studied it carefully. His eyes widened as he read the grades and course descriptions. "You have a degree in engineering?" "Yes, sir." "Then what the hell are you doing cleaning floors in my factory?" Diana could feel the eyes of everyone around her, but she forced herself to meet Robert's gaze directly. "Life doesn't always go according to plan, Mr. Blackstone. I had to choose between finishing my education and taking care of my sick mother. I chose family." "But this says you graduated." "I went back to school later, part-time, while working full-time jobs. It took me 8 years instead of 4, but I finished." Robert was still staring at the transcript like it might disappear if he looked away. "What kind of work did you do after graduation?" "I worked at Johnson's Auto Repair for 5 years, Diana said. "Tom Johnson taught me everything the textbooks couldn't. After that, I ran my own shop for 12 years, specializing in European luxury cars. Cars very similar to the one that's been giving you problems." "Your own shop?" Dr. Chen asked, sounding stunned. "You owned an automotive repair business?" "DC Auto Solutions," Diana replied. "We handled mostly high-end vehicles that other shops couldn't figure out. Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Porsche. Cars with complex computer systems and unusual engineering challenges." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert could feel his face getting red, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger at himself. Here was a woman with 15 years of professional automotive experience, and he had been paying her minimum wage to empty trash cans. "What happened to your business?" he asked. Diana's expression grew sad. "My husband died 3 years ago. He handled the business side of things while I did the technical work. After he passed, I couldn't manage both sides by myself. I had to close the shop and find steady work with health insurance. So you came here." "I came here because I needed a job that would pay the bills and provide benefits while I figured out what to do next," Diana said. "I never intended for it to be permanent, but time has a way of passing faster than you expect." Robert looked around at his engineering team again. Some of them were staring at the ground, clearly feeling awkward about the situation. Others were looking at Diana with new respect, like they were seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you tell anyone about your background when you were hired?" Robert asked. "Would it have mattered?" Diana replied with a slight smile. "You needed someone to clean the factory, not someone to solve engineering problems. And honestly, after losing my business and my husband, I wasn't sure I wanted to get back into automotive work anyway. Sometimes it's easier to start over as someone completely different. But you've been watching us struggle with this engine problem for months." "I tried not to get involved," Diana admitted. "I told myself it wasn't my job anymore. But engines have always been like puzzles to me. I couldn't help noticing things, especially during the quiet night shifts when I could really listen to how the car sounded." Robert folded up the transcript and handed it back to Diana. Is there anything else about your background that I should know? Diana thought for a moment. I hold 2 patents for automotive cooling system improvements. I was a certified instructor for European automotive repair techniques, and I've published 4 articles in technical journals about diagnosing complex engine problems. Jesus Christ, Robert muttered under his breath. There's one more thing, Diana added, reaching into her pocket. I brought my old business cards in case anyone wanted to verify my credentials. She handed Robert a slightly worn business card that read, DC Auto Solutions, Diana Washington, owner, master technician. Below her name was a list of certifications and specializations that was longer than most of his engineers' resumes. Robert stared at the card for a long moment, then looked up at Diana with an expression that was hard to read. Diana Washington. Your name is Diana Washington. Yes, sir. And for the past 2 years I've been calling you. Robert realized he couldn't finish the sentence because he had never actually learned her name. He had just thought of her as the cleaning lady. You've never called me anything, Mr. Blackstone, Diana said gently. We've never actually had a conversation before yesterday. The weight of that statement settled over the factory floor like a heavy blanket. Here was a woman with more automotive experience than most of his engineering team, and Robert had been so caught up in his assumptions that he had never even bothered to learn her name. Diana, Robert said finally, testing the sound of it. Diana Washington. Yes, sir. I owe you an apology. I owe you several apologies, actually. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Blackstone, Diana replied. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to. That's more than most people would have done. Robert shook his head. No, that's not enough. Not nearly enough. He looked around at the crowd of employees who had gathered to watch this conversation. Engineers, technicians, factory workers, office staff, all of them looking at him and Diana with expressions ranging from amazement to embarrassment to curiosity. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert announced, his voice carrying across the factory floor. I'd like you all to meet Diana Washington, master, automotive technician, business owner, published expert in complex engine diagnostics, and apparently the person who just solved our biggest technical challenge. The crowd began to murmur and whisper among themselves. Robert held up his hand for silence. For the past 2 years, Diana has been working here as a cleaning technician, not because that was the best use of her skills, but because that was the job we offered her, and that was the job she needed. Today, she's shown us that talent comes in many forms, and that we've been wasting one of our most valuable resources by making assumptions about what people are capable of. Diana felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was not the time to get emotional. Diana, Robert continued, I'm hoping you'll consider a different position here at Premier Motors, one that actually matches your qualifications and experience. What kind of position? Diana asked. Robert smiled for the first time in months. How does senior engineering consultant sound, with a salary that reflects your actual value to this company? As the crowd around them began to applaud, Diana realized that sometimes the most unexpected opportunities came from the most unlikely places. And sometimes being underestimated was just the first step toward proving what you were really capable of. 2 months later, Diana Washington stood in the same spot where Robert Blackstone had made his challenging dare, but everything else had changed completely. She was wearing a crisp white lab coat instead of a cleaning uniform, and the name tag on her chest read, Diana Washington, Senior Engineering Consultant. In her hands was a tablet computer showing test results that would have seemed impossible just a few weeks ago. The engine that had been unfixable was now running perfectly. Not just the original prototype, but 50 additional test vehicles that had been built using Diana's solution. Every single one had passed the 2,000-mile stress test without any problems. The longest-running test car had just hit 5,000 miles and was still performing like new. The latest batch of vehicles just completed their final testing. Dr. Chen reported, walking up to Diana with a smile on his face. 0 failures, 0 irregularities. Your modification worked exactly as you predicted. Diana nodded, but she couldn't quite believe it was real. 3 months ago, she had been invisible in this factory. Today she was leading a team of the same engineers who had once dismissed her as just a cleaning lady. "Any word from the client?" Diana asked. "Robert's in the final contract meeting right now," Dr. Chen replied. "But from what I heard this morning, they're not just accepting our original proposal. They want to increase the order by 60%. Apparently, word got out about our innovative solution, and now other manufacturers want to license our technology." Diana shook her head in amazement. The simple fix that had cost $300 per vehicle was now being valued at millions of dollars in licensing deals. "Dr. Chen," Diana said, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." "Of course. How do you really feel about working for someone who used to clean the floors around here?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about how to answer. "Can I tell you something, Diana? In the 3 months before you solved our engine problem, I was starting to think I wasn't cut out for this job anymore. We had tried everything I could think of and nothing worked. I was beginning to doubt my own abilities." "You're an excellent engineer," Diana said. "Maybe, but I was approaching the problem like an engineer," Dr. Chen replied. "You approached it like someone who understands that cars are more than just the sum of their parts. You listened to the engine like it was trying to tell you what was wrong. That's not something they teach in engineering school." Before Diana could respond, Robert Blackstone came walking across the factory floor with the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face. Behind him were several people in expensive suits who Diana didn't recognize. "Diana!" Robert called out as he approached. "I'd like you to meet some representatives from European Luxury Motors. They're here to discuss licensing our engine modification technology for their new vehicle line." Diana shook hands with the visitors, still getting used to being introduced as a technical expert rather than being ignored completely. One of the representatives, a woman named Isabella, seemed particularly impressed with Diana's background. "We've heard remarkable things about your diagnostic methods," Isabella said. "Our engineers are very interested in learning how you identified the root cause of a problem that had stumped so many other experts. Sometimes the best solutions come from stepping back and looking at problems differently," Diana replied. "When you've been in the automotive business as long as I have, you learn to trust your instincts as much as your instruments." After the visitors left to tour the rest of the facility, Robert pulled Diana aside for a private conversation. "I have something I need to tell you," he said, his voice more serious than usual. "What is it?" "Do you remember that $50,000 bonus I promised you?" Diana nodded. The money had been life-changing for her. She had been able to fix her roof, help her daughter with college expenses, and even start a small emergency fund for the first time in years. "Well, considering that your solution is now worth about $20 million in contracts and licensing deals, $50,000 seems a little insulting," Robert said. "You don't owe me anything more than what you promised," Diana replied. "Actually, I do," Robert said, pulling out an envelope. "This is your new employment contract. Your salary has been adjusted to reflect your actual value to this company, plus you'll receive a percentage of any licensing revenue generated by your engine modification." Diana opened the envelope and looked at the numbers inside. Her new salary was more than double what most senior engineers made at other companies. The licensing percentage alone would probably earn her more in the next 5 years than she had made in her entire previous career. "Robert, this is too much," she said. "No, Diana, it's not nearly enough," Robert replied. "But it's a start. There's something else, though, something more important than money." "What's that?" Robert gestured toward the factory floor, where several groups of employees were working on different projects. "See that young woman over there? The one working on the transmission testing?" Diana looked where he was pointing and saw a young Hispanic woman who looked to be in her early 20s. "That's Carmen Rodriguez," Robert continued. "She's been working in our shipping department for 2 years. Yesterday she came to me with an idea for improving our quality control process, an idea that could save us millions of dollars." "That's wonderful." 6 months ago, I would have thanked her politely and forgotten about it by the next day, Robert admitted. "But after what happened with you, I've started paying attention to ideas from everyone, not just people with engineering degrees," Diana smiled. Good ideas can come from anywhere. Exactly. And that's why I'm implementing a new company policy. Everyone who works here, regardless of their current job title, will have the opportunity to contribute ideas and solutions. We're also changing our hiring and promotion practices to focus on skills and potential rather than just formal education. Robert paused for a moment, looking around the factory with pride. Diana, you didn't just solve our engine problem. You changed how this entire company thinks about talent and potential. As they talked, Diana noticed a small group of young employees gathering near the entrance to the factory. They were clearly waiting for something, and several of them kept looking in her direction. "What's going on over there?" Diana asked. Robert grinned. "Why don't you go find out?" Diana walked over to the group and one of the young women stepped forward. It was Patricia, the engineer who had been so interested in Diana's diagnostic methods. "Diana, we wanted to thank you for something," Patricia said. "Thank me for what?" "For showing us that there's more than one way to be successful in this industry," Patricia replied. "A lot of us young engineers have been feeling pressure to fit into a certain mold, to approach problems in very specific ways. Watching you, work showed us that innovation comes from thinking differently, not from following the same old patterns." Another young engineer, a man named Carlos, stepped forward. "We've started a study group where we practice different diagnostic techniques, hands-on methods, listening techniques, observation skills, things that complement our computer training but aren't usually taught in engineering programs. We call it the Diana Washington method," Patricia added with a smile. Diana felt tears starting to form in her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. "You don't need to name it after me," she said softly. "Just remember that the best engineers are the ones who never stop learning and who never assume they have all the answers." "We won't forget," Carlos promised. As the young engineers returned to their work, Diana found herself standing alone in the middle of the factory floor. 3 months ago, this had been a place where she felt invisible and undervalued. Today, it felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. Everyone at college is talking about the article in Automotive Engineering magazine. Love you." Diana smiled and put her phone away. The magazine article had been Dr. Chen's idea, a way to share their solution with the broader automotive community. Diana had been reluctant to put her name on it at first, but Robert had insisted. "The world needs to know that innovation can come from anywhere," he had said. As Diana walked back toward her new office, she passed the spot where she used to park her cleaning cart every night. A different person was doing that job now, a young man named David who was studying mechanical engineering part-time. Diana made a mental note to introduce herself to him soon. You never knew what kind of ideas someone might have if you just took the time to ask. The engine that had once been Unfixable was now the cornerstone of Premier Motors' most successful product line. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized and nurtured, regardless of where it was found. Diana had learned something important over the past few months. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest opportunities. A chance conversation, a willingness to listen, a moment when someone decided to look beyond assumptions and see what was really there. The engine was fixed, the company was thriving, and Diana Washington was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes that was the best solution of all.